A bar fight ended before it began, because inside there was a man whose very name commanded respect. In a small-town bar, a rowdy group of young men tried to stir up trouble. Voices rose, chairs scraped, and everyone thought a fight was about to break out. But in the corner sat a quiet man. He didn't yell, he didn't swing a fist. With nothing more than a look, he silenced the entire room. No one knew who he really was that night, but they were about to find out. Welcome to The Last Stand, where we share stories of forgotten courage, silent strength, and honor that never fades. Today, we tell the story of a fight that never happened, and how silence became the loudest form of authority. Because sometimes one look speaks louder than 1,000 words. The old tavern at the edge of town had stood for decades. Its wooden doors were weathered by rain, the bar stools worn smooth by countless patrons, and the smell of smoke and spilled liquor lingered like a permanent shadow. It wasn't fancy, but for the men of the town, it was the place to end the day with laughter, drinks, and the comfort of routine. That evening, however, something felt different. The bar was crowded, louder than usual, filled with the sharp clatter of glasses and bursts of laughter. When the door creaked open, the noise dipped just slightly, enough for people to notice the sound of boots against the old wooden floor. An older man stepped inside. His hair was silver, his jaw square, and his posture impossibly straight for someone his age. His face was lined with years, but not weakened by them. Instead, those lines seemed carved by discipline. He wasn't dressed to impress, just a plain jacket and clean, worn trousers, but his presence carried weight. He moved toward the bar slowly, deliberately. He asked for nothing more than a soda, his voice low, his tone calm. A few people glanced at him, then looked away. They didn't know him, yet somehow, they couldn't help but feel something different about him. Something in the way he carried himself spread an invisible gravity across the room. At a table in the corner sat a group of rowdy young men. They weren't dangerous, just loud, the kind of guys who thrived on being the center of attention. They slapped the table, laughed too hard at their own jokes, and jostled one another like schoolboys who had outgrown their classrooms, but not their immaturity. Most of the bar's regulars were used to ignoring them. Tonight, though, their energy had a sharper edge. The jokes were louder, the shoulders a little heavier when they shoved each other. The room's laughter faltered, replaced by wary glances. The old man at the bar sipped his soda quietly. His eyes never left the glass, but his ears caught everything: the rise and fall of voices, the scrape of a chair, even the uneven rhythm of boots shifting on the floor. He appeared detached, almost indifferent. But in truth, he was listening to every detail. One of the young men, taller, broader, the kind who liked to test his strength on anyone who'd let him, stood up. He barked a laugh that turned heads, then pointed toward a customer in the corner. A chair tipped over. Tension spread like smoke. The bar stiffened. Everyone knew what was about to happen: a fight. Chairs crashing, fists swinging. It had happened before, and it would happen again. But not this time. Because just then, the older man raised his eyes. He didn't move his body, didn't lift his voice. He simply looked. His gaze was steady, cold, and unflinching, the kind of look you didn't forget. A look born from someone who had stared down danger more times than anyone in that room could imagine. The loud man's laughter faltered. The others noticed. The energy shifted. Conversations died mid-sentence. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was confusion. But in the silence that followed, something heavier began to settle over the room. The young men muttered among themselves, their bravado slipping. A few glanced around nervously, as if waiting for someone to explain what just happened. The older man didn't blink, didn't frown, didn't show a single ounce of aggression. And yet, without a word, the noise drained from the bar. At another table, a patron whispered to his friend, "Who is he?" The friend shrugged, whispering back, "Don't know, but you can feel it, can't you?" The bartender glanced up, eyes narrowing just slightly, and gave a small nod as if he knew more than the others. But he stayed quiet. The bar was no longer his to control. The older man lowered his gaze back to his glass. He sipped again, unhurried. To him, nothing extraordinary had happened. To everyone else, the night had just taken a turn they would never forget. The bar's air grew heavier, thicker, as if everyone inside had agreed to hold their breath at once. The rowdy group of young men, moments ago laughing and jeering, now shuffled uneasily at their table. Their leader, a broad-shouldered brute named Tony, wasn't used to being challenged, let alone by silence. Tony leaned back in his chair, forced a smirk, and tried to laugh off the shift. But the laughter didn't stick. His friends glanced at him for cues, but none of them could bring back the energy they had lost. The old man's look lingered in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Tony wasn't about to back down, not in front of his crew. Pride demanded he reassert himself. He slammed his empty glass onto the table, the sharp crack breaking the silence, and pushed himself to his feet. He swaggered toward the bar, weaving slightly between tables, his voice booming loud enough to pull every eye in the room. "Hey, old man, what's the matter? Soda? Really? This is a bar, not a church social." His friends chuckled half-heartedly, but it was clear their bravado was fading. The other patrons stayed quiet, watching with a mixture of curiosity and dread. Tony stopped just short of the old man, planting his hand firmly on the bar with a thud. He leaned closer, his grin forced, his eyes daring. "Look at me when I talk to you." The older man raised his eyes again, calm as stone. No twitch, no flinch, no sign of intimidation. Just a steady, measured look, the kind of gaze that cut deeper than a blade. For the first time, Tony faltered. He didn't step back, not yet, but the grin slipped from his face. The silence stretched longer, every second gnawing at his pride. He wanted the man to react, to say something, anything. But the old man stayed still. From a table near the back, a hushed whisper broke out. "You don't know who that is, do you?" Another voice, equally low, answered, "No. Who?" "I heard stories. Special Forces. Delta." The words slithered across the room like sparks in dry grass. People leaned toward each other, muttering quietly, their eyes widening. Tony heard the whispers. He saw the shift in his friends' faces, the way their eyes darted between him and the older man, as if silently begging him to drop it, but his pride wouldn't let go. He forced a laugh, though it came out thin. "Special Forces, huh? He's just an old man. Look at him. Can barely lift his glass." But even as he spoke, Tony's hand trembled slightly against the bar. He clenched it into a fist, trying to hide the shake. His chest rose and fell faster than before. The bartender wiped down a glass, eyes narrowed. He muttered just loud enough for Tony to hear. "Careful. You're picking a fight you can't win, not with him." Tony snapped his head toward the bartender, but the man had already turned away, busying himself with bottles on the shelf. The old man finally moved, not fast, not sudden, just deliberate. He lifted his glass, took a slow sip of soda, and set it back down. Then he returned his gaze to Tony, steady and unbroken. The effect was crushing. The room seemed to shrink, the air pressing in from every side. No one else made a sound. Even the jukebox in the corner, which had been playing a muffled tune, fell silent when someone nervously pulled the plug. Tony's smirk was gone. Sweat beaded at his temple. His voice came out quieter this time, though he fought to keep it firm. "You think you're better than me, old man?" The veteran didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was heavier than any insult. At the far side of the room, an older patron leaned closer to his companion and whispered, "I saw his face once, years ago, training base in the desert. They called him Iron Hawk. If it's really him, that man's a legend." The whisper spread. Soon half the bar had heard it, and the energy shifted again. The fear in the room was no longer about fists or fights. It was respect reluctant, unspoken, but undeniable. Tony swallowed hard. For the first time that night, he wasn't sure what to do. The bar felt like a battlefield without a single shot fired. Every eye was fixed on the quiet man at the counter, whose presence carried more weight than fists or weapons ever could. Tony hovered near the bar, his broad shoulders tense, his pride caught between defiance and retreat. The silence pressed down harder with each passing second. His friends shifted uneasily, their earlier laughter long gone. From the corner, an older man finally spoke, not loudly, but with enough authority that his words cut through the silence. "I know who he is." Heads turned. The man continued, voice calm, almost reverent. "Richard Cole. They called him Iron Hawk, Delta Force. I saw his name once in a report. Missions no one was supposed to come back from." The room froze. Patrons exchanged stunned glances. Some sat straighter in their chairs. Others looked at the veteran with new eyes, not as a stranger, but as a man who had walked through fire and returned. Tony's jaw tightened. He had heard the whispers before, but now, hearing the name, the legend, he felt the sting of his own arrogance. Richard Cole didn't rise to the revelation. He didn't boast or confirm. He simply lifted his gaze toward Tony once more, the same calm, unyielding look as before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even warning. It was discipline, the kind that had been forged in impossible conditions, where hesitation meant death and control meant survival. Tony felt his knees weaken. For a split second, he considered backing down, apologizing, walking away. But pride chained him in place. The younger men at Tony's table had stopped pretending. Their eyes were wide, their voices hushed. Man, that's him. It has to be. Cole? I thought he was just a story. The bartender leaned against the counter, shaking his head slowly. He doesn't need to raise his voice. Men like him already spoke loud enough when it mattered. The words landed like stones in Tony's chest. He realized everyone in the bar now saw him not as the toughest man in the room, but as the fool challenging a legend. Richard Cole took another sip of his drink, his movements deliberate, unhurried. He placed the glass back on the bar, his eyes never leaving Tony's. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, and then, for the first time all night, Tony looked away. His shoulders sagged. He muttered under his breath, words no one could fully catch. The authority in the room no longer belonged to Tony's bravado. It belonged entirely to the veteran who hadn't spoken a single word. At the back, the young soldier who had recognized him stood, his voice steady but filled with awe. "Sir, it really is you, isn't it? Richard Cole. It's an honor just to stand in the same room." The bar held its breath again. This time, the silence wasn't fear. It was respect, raw, undeniable, and shared. Tony swallowed hard, shame rising in his chest. His pride had driven him too far, and now there was no escape from the weight of what he'd done. The bar was utterly still. The name had been spoken, Richard Cole, Ironhawk. It carried a weight heavier than any punch Tony could have thrown. The young soldier stood firm, eyes bright with admiration. "Sir, my instructors told stories about you. Missions in the desert, raids that never made the news. They said you carried men out when no one else would. You're the kind of soldier we all want to be. America owes you more than it can ever repay. To meet you here, like this, is the honor of my life." The words rang through the room. This was no longer a bar on a Friday night. It was a place where history had walked in, alive and breathing. Tony's chest heaved as if all the air had turned to lead. His face, once smug and loud, was pale now. He cleared his throat, voice cracking as he forced out the words. I didn't know. I didn't know who you were. I spoke to you like you were nothing. I mocked you. And now," he paused, shaking his head, the weight of his own arrogance pressing down. "I disrespected a man who earned more than I ever will. I was a fool. I'm sorry. Truly. If I could take it back, I would. Please forgive me." The bar held its breath. Some nodded slightly, as if Tony's words mirrored their own thoughts. For the first time that night, Richard Cole spoke. His voice was low, gravelly, but carried the weight of command. "Respect, son, isn't about knowing someone's name. It isn't about rank, medals, or stories whispered in a barracks. Respect starts with you. With the way you carry yourself, with the way you treat people when you think no one's watching." He leaned back slightly, eyes still locked on Tony. "I've seen men who thought fists made them strong. I buried some of them. Strength isn't how hard you can hit. Strength is walking away when your pride screams at you to stay. Strength is keeping your men alive when everything in you says run. And strength is respecting others, even when you don't think they deserve it, because that respect says more about you than about them." The room was silent, the lesson falling heavy on every ear. Cole's words weren't just for Tony, they were for everyone. Cole reached for his glass, drained the last sip, and set it down carefully on the bar. He stood, his frame still tall and steady despite the years. The young soldier straightened, snapping to attention, and gave a crisp salute. "America is grateful, sir, and so am I." Cole gave the faintest nod, acknowledging the gesture without basking in it. Tony lowered his head. Thank you for the lesson. Cole's eyes softened just slightly, enough to be seen but not enough to weaken the steel in his voice. Learn from tonight. Don't repeat it. One day, someone will look to you for an example. Make sure you give them something worth following. Cole adjusted his jacket, turned, and walked toward the door. As he passed, several patrons stood, some bowing their heads, others simply moving aside. No one dared stop him. No one wanted to. The door opened, letting in the chill of the night air. Before stepping out, Cole paused just long enough for one final glance around the room. His eyes said what his mouth did not: carry yourselves with honor. And then he was gone, swallowed by the night. Inside, the bar remained hushed. The fight that never started had become a story that everyone in that room would carry for the rest of their lives, not of fear, but of respect for a man whose silence spoke louder than words.